Hi there, today I'm going to help you answer some of those questions that your colleagues keep plaguing you with, like what is the best enrichment tool for the US, what's the best enrichment tool for EMEA, what's the best enrichment tool for APAC, what's the best enrichment tool for scoring leads, getting phone numbers for my sales team, or for form shortening. What I've done is I've done a data analysis over 5,000 leads, and I've broken down the results in order to help answer these questions and help you make decisions. So I'll show you the end result here, and then in all these subsequent tabs and in this whole blog post, I walk you through how I conducted this data analysis so you can replicate the analysis I've done and potentially improve it so that you can answer these questions using your own data. So let's just take a look at the output really quickly. So I've got it broken down here by region. So this is overall containing all 5,500 leads. And then whenever I was able to identify a country for a person, I broke the analysis down by that country. So we've got US, EMEA, APAC, and unknown when we weren't able to find a country for this person using enrichment. And then within each geography, I've done a breakdown for, how many fields is this? Nope. I've done a breakdown for 11 different fields and how each enrichment platform performed over these 16 metrics for each field. And then I average how this metric performed over all the fields in the overall column here. So this 31% is the aggregate of how Clearbit was able to populate all of these 11 different fields. So this is what the output looks like. And I'll now go through how I actually got to this position because it can look quite intimidating. I understand all these different colors, all these different rows. So I'm going to break things down step by step to show you how to get to this point. So the very first step was to create a report in Salesforce for leads and contacts for all the MQLs that came through in May and June of 2022 for my team. So this is what the Enrichment Metrics sheet is here. It contains 5,000 different leads. I've hidden the email addresses and first names of all the lead here, so we just have the domain exposed. And I've also hidden their individual LinkedIn URLs just to preserve their privacy. But in the reports in Salesforce, I pulled in the 11 different fields. So some of them are person level fields, like the person's LinkedIn URL, their job title, their phone number, or their country. And then other fields are pulled in based on the person's company. So the company name, website, LinkedIn URL, country, employee range, industry, and revenue range. I created two reports in Salesforce, one on the lead and one on the contact, and I pulled in all of these 11 fields, exported it, and then I imported it into this sheet here. In order to get the Crunchbase data in, we didn't have Crunchbase automatically enriching records in Salesforce like we do for Clearbit or ZoomInfo. So we didn't have this information readily available on leads and contacts. So what we had to do was get a unique list of all these domains, push them into the Clearbit platform, and then we were able to push them into the Crunchbase platform. And then Crunchbase gave us all this firmographic information on all the companies we uploaded. And then I uploaded it to this sheet here. And then in order to get all these Crunchbase metrics into this sheet, a VLOOKUP formula is used. So in this case, we look up the domain from this sheet, and then we pull in the corresponding column using this VLOOKUP formula. So in this case, we're searching for the domain in here. Once we find the domain, we're going to go across and find the corresponding, whether it's the company name, company LinkedIn URL, revenue, or the Crunchbase industry and stuff like that. And one thing to note is that Crunchbase only has firmographic information on people. It does not have demographic information. So that's why when we're doing the comparison between the enrichment tools for people, it's only Clearbit and ZoomInfo. But when we're doing it on the company level field, it's Clearbit, Crunchbase, and ZoomInfo. And before I go any further, I'll just say that you can access every tab in this Google Sheet from this post. So if you just open up this link, it'll bring you to this tab, and then you can cycle through all the other tabs as you want. So you can actually dig in and see what formulas I'm using in every single one of these calculations. Right, so once we got in all the Clearbit, Crunchbase, and ZoomInfo data, the first thing to do was to do a bit of a cleanup. So what I did was I did a pivot table of the Clearbit company name, and I knew there were issues in our instance where sometimes Clearbit was matching people incorrectly to these companies, like unknown watches, unknown example, no IP. And I used the pivot table to get an estimate of how often this occurred in this data set of 5,000 people. And then I removed all these matches because I didn't want these false matches distorting the numbers, because the people don't actually work at these companies. So every value returned for these companies is incorrect and obviously wrong and distorting the metrics. So I got rid of all these companies. For ZoomInfo, we didn't have the same issue, as you can see here. So we only needed to do the cleanup for the Clearbit companies. So I went through all these high volume company names, which were clearly erroneous matches, and then just removed the rows from the enrichment metrics sheet. Then the next bit of cleanup that needed to be done is each of the enrichment platforms return different values for the same fields or for similar fields. So for example, if we look at the company revenue, we can see that all three of the platforms use like different denotations. Is that a word? They denote the revenue in different ways and have different revenue ranges. So what I had to do was I had to map all of these to a uniform data set and then convert all these individual values to this normalized revenue value in this enrichment metric sheet. And I did the exact same for employees. I took all these values here, I mapped them to the normalized employees standard, and then I went into this sheet and converted all these values to this normalized standard. So that was one of the first cleanups that needed to be done. Other cleanups. So for LinkedIn URLs, sometimes they started with HTTPS, other times they just started with HTTP, as we can see here. I'll zoom in a bit. So that was one issue. And then sometimes they ended in a / and other times they didn't. So just to get consistency between these values so that I could use formulae later on to be able to tell if they matched, I needed all these values to be consistent. So there's just some formulas here to strip away the / and strip away the HTTP or HTTPS. And then for phone numbers, a similar cleanup was needed where sometimes brackets were put around the local routing number and sometimes they weren't, or sometimes a plus was used for an international phone number extension and other times they weren't. So again, I needed to remove all these inconsistencies and get all the numbers in the same format so that I could easily compare them with formulas to tell if they matched. So once I've cleaned up the phone numbers, the URLs, the revenue and the employee ranges, I could then begin analyzing to see, does the value from Clearbit match the value from Zoom, match the value from Crunchbase, and then put the output in these agree and winner columns, which I'll go through in a second. The one field that I didn't normalize was the industry field. And the reason for this is because, first of all, we can notice that Crunchbase and ZoomInfo both have multiple values sometimes for the industry, whereas Clearbit only has one. And there's so many different values for industry here. It would have taken a lot of time to map all the industries from Crunchbase to the corresponding industries in Clearbit to the corresponding industries in ZoomInfo, and then to create a formula to say if any of the industries from Crunchbase match these, then call it a match. If they don't match, then don't call it a match, call it disagree. Building that formula to compare to see if this contains the same industry as Clearbit or contains the same industry as ZoomInfo would have been complex. and we decided that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze here, so we didn't do it. That's one potential optimization you could make, is mapping all the industries from these 3 platforms to a single standard, like I've done here, and then creating a formula to compare to see whether these enrichment tools matched. So now that all the data has been cleaned up, I'll walk you through how the agree column is calculated. So I've hidden the LinkedIn URLs here, so I won't use that as an example, but let me choose a nice one that's been standardized. Okay. Yeah, so I'll use the company country as an example here. So the agree field looks to see if the values from these platforms match. So in this case, Clearbit and ZoomInfo match. So the output of the agree column is Clearbit and ZoomInfo. Whereas, let's see if we can find a disagreement. Okay, there are no disagreements here for the moment. But if we look at, say, some of the person level fields here, where we're only comparing 2 things, the person country, for example, we can see that Clearbit and ZoomInfo match. So the output of the agree column is a tie. And it's just a series of if statements that do this comparison. Whereas ZoomInfo is the only one populated here. So that's why ZoomInfo is put in the agree column. The logic I use for each of these comparisons is described in this blog post here. So just summarize it nicely. If we're only comparing the person level fields, where it's only Clearbit and ZoomInfo, then the logic is quite straightforward and simple. If they're all empty, so let's go here, we can see all the unique values in the agree column. We have all empty in the case that Clearbit and ZoomInfo are both empty. We have Clearbit in the case that ZoomInfo is empty. We have tie if both Clearbit and ZoomInfo are populated and agree, or we have ZoomInfo if ZoomInfo is populated and Clearbit isn't. And then we have disagree in the case that they're both populated but the values don't match. So that's summarized here. And then the 3-way comparison is a lot more complex. I've written out in words how each of the values in the agree field for the 3-way comparison is calculated. So let's go here. Yeah. So we can see all the unique values here. And I explain how these are all calculated in the blog post. And if you also want to, if you're more of a formulas person, this looks horrendous. So if you want help understanding this, the blog post will definitely help. But I also created this 3-way comparison logic table. So we've got all the possible combinations of when these 3 enrichment platforms are populated. So 1 means it has a value, 0 means it's empty or there's nothing in it. And then I've also added an additional column here to specify whether the populated fields agree with one another. In this case, they disagree. 0 means these 2 values disagree, whereas a 1 means these 2 values agree with one another. And then I just went through all the different scenarios. So taking a few of these easy ones, like here we can see ZoomInfo is the only one populated, so therefore the output or the winner should be ZoomInfo. And in all these cases where gray is used in the left-hand column, that indicates that this column is actually redundant. It's not needed to help compute the output. And the reason for that is, if we look at all these examples, these are all empty, so it doesn't matter whether they all agree or not, because they're all empty, so the output is all empty. Or in this case, ZoomInfo is the only one populated, so it doesn't matter if it agrees with other values. So the same for Clearbit, same for Crunchbase, it's the only one populated here, and then down below it's the exact same again. They're all empty, or it's only one platform populated at a time. So the only places where this agree column matters are the cells in white. So in this case here, we see these 2 are both populated, but they disagree. So the output is disagree. Same here, both populated, disagree, both populated, disagree. And then when all 3 of them are populated, but disagree, we could have Crunchbase equaling to Clearbit, which this combination where both of these disagree with ZoomInfo, then the output is Clearbit and Crunchbase. We could have Crunchbase equal to ZoomInfo, and both of these values disagree with Clearbit, then the output is Crunchbase and ZoomInfo. We could have Clearbit's value equal to ZoomInfo's value, which disagrees with Crunchbase, so then the output is Clearbit and ZoomInfo. And then the final condition here is all three of them disagree with one another, so then the output is disagree. And then this case, this is an easy one, just two of them are populated and they agree, so the output is Clearbit and ZoomInfo. Here, two are populated, they all agree, so the output is Crunchbase and ZoomInfo. Clearbit and Crunchbase are populated, they both agree with one another, so the output is Clearbit and Crunchbase. And then all three are populated and they all agree with one another, so the output is a tie. So this is how to interpret this logic table, and then this winner formula just puts it in if statements to get the desired output based on the output column shown here. And again, it's all written down nicely in words here, so if you can't understand the logic table or can't understand all those formulas, this summarizes it nicely. So now I've gone through the agree column. We can see why it's so important to have done that data normalization and the cleanup, because here, now let's use another example, like for the phone numbers, for example, if we hadn't done the cleanup, some of these phone numbers might look like they're not a match because one has brackets around the local routing number and one doesn't. But once we've done the cleanup and removed those brackets, the two numbers are the same. So it allows us to use formulas like these to quickly see if the values from all the platforms agree with one another. A good example of where more normalization could be used, which I didn't do, is here. So we can see at the moment the agree formula says this title disagrees with this one because one has a comma in it and this one has and in it. So this is just a simple formula to say if this equals this. So it obviously doesn't, but we know as humans looking at this that these things are essentially the same. So you could do a cleanup of this job title field to do certain things like remove commas, hyphens, anything that's not white space. And also if ands are present, replace them with like the AND characters, or just be consistent in that you're always going to replace AND with the ampersand, or you're always going to replace the ampersand with AND. So then when you do have formulas and you've done this cleanup, all these things that the formula says are disagreements will then actually turn into agreements once you've done the cleanup. So that's why it was so important to clean up the phone numbers, the LinkedIn URLs, and the revenue and employee ranges. So now that we've got the agree column, the winner column is a simple formula to say if the value in the agree column is not disagree, then pull in the value from the agree column. If it is disagree, then the formula just leaves it blank. And it leaves it blank so we can later on do a manual review to see where are all the disagreements that the formula is pointing out. And then we get a human to manually review these disagreements to see if in fact the values from the enrichment platforms actually match, or if they disagree, go and verify using LinkedIn, social media, etc. to try and find out which enrichment tool is correct. So I'll walk through how that validation and manual review is done in a second. So in the case that there is a disagree, we can see that this value here no longer has a formula because previously it was left blank, and then we got a human to review it. We got the human to see there was a disagree and then find that these two are actually equal. So this is the output of the manual review essentially. And in order to help with that, this document is also available in this sheet and in this section. So manual review for disagreement between enrichment tools. I list all the validation sources here, but it's all in this document where if there's a disagreement between, say, a person's country, Clearbit says it's South Africa and ZoomInfo says it's Australia, and you want to know which value is correct, I give validation sources that you can use for each field that has a disagreement. So if it's someone's job title, you can look up the person on LinkedIn or look up the company website. Person LinkedIn URL, you'll obviously go straight to LinkedIn. For the person's country, you can use LinkedIn, you can use social media platforms, you can use any international extension that might be on their phone number, or you could use their email domain. So if it's at testcompany.co.uk, you know they're in the United Kingdom. So you could also use information from the email address to try and find out where the person is or infer where they are. And then you can do the same for the company. Like you can look up the company on LinkedIn to find the number of employees, to find the website, to find the employee range that's also on LinkedIn. So I list all the validation sources that you can use for each sheet. I list all the validation sources that you can use for each field in this document. And I also summarize them briefly in these sections here. In this sheet, there are over, so the sum we can see in the bottom corner here is 2,000. So there's about 2,200 disagreements. So in order to get a human to manually review all these disagreements would take ages. So instead, we decided to prioritize on disagreements in the person country field and the company country field. And the reason for this is because at my company, we use those fields for routing leads to particular salespeople. So we want this information to be as accurate as possible. And we also want to identify the best enrichment platform at identifying a person's country because we use it in our routing. So these were the two fields we cared about the most. So if we go to person country here, in the case there was a disagreement, we'd get the intern to go to, let's say, person country, go to all these validation sources and try and find out which enrichment tool actually had the person's company correct. And then they'd manually put in the value to say, hey, the winner is Clearbit, the winner is ZoomInfo. And then we do the exact same with company country, where if there's any disagreements in the agree column here, then the winning company country would be empty until the intern manually reviewed it and then put in the winning country in here. Sorry, they'd put it in the winner column. So they'd manually review any disagreements where disagree appears in the agree column. Then they'd see which enrichment platform is actually the winner and then put it in the winner column. And then this winning company country formula just pulls in the value from the enrichment tool that won. So in this case, Clearbit and ZoomInfo were the winners. So it pulls in the company country from either Clearbit or ZoomInfo. Or the case where it's just Clearbit as the winner, it's going to pull in the value from Clearbit. If it's a tie, it doesn't matter where it pulls it from. So it can pull it from either of these three. So that's what the winning company country formula does. And we have something similar for person country, where we have the winner, we have the winning enrichment tool identified in here. So in the case that it's a tie, again, it doesn't matter where we pull it from. Or in the case that it's just one, we're going to pull the company from the winner. So in this case, ZoomInfo was the winner, so we're going to pull it from here, and the actual country value is United States. So this is an example where the formula found a disagreement. We got the intern to manually review it, and you can notice that there's no formula here. So here's the formula, there's no formula here, and that shows that the intern manually put this value in, and they identified ZoomInfo as being the winner, and then we're going to pull in the winning value from ZoomInfo and put it here. So this actual country field has a formula to say, pull in the winning country from, like, pull in the winning country if there is a winning country from the person country. If there's not, then use the company country, then use the winning company country as the winning value. So this is a fallback. In the case that the winner here says all empty, then it's going to go across and get the company country winning value and use that. But in the case that this country, in the case that the winner is something like Thai, ZoomInfo, or Clearbit, then it actually pulls the value from here. So you can check all of this out using all these formulas, but I'm trying to explain them because sometimes this can all be a little bit intimidating. And then the final part of this is once we have the country, we use a VLOOKUP formula in region mapping to map that country to the region. So then we get the actual region based off this actual country field. Now for each of these 11 fields, there are 17 different metrics that are calculated. And I'll walk you through each of these now quickly, but if you want to see it all written out, the enrichment metrics and what each of them do is explained here. So if we look at all these, let's scroll to the left. All these populated fields calculate how often the platform was able to have some sort of value in this field. So in this case, Clearbit populated 926 of the records for job title. And then the same for ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo was able to populate 264 records for job title. So that's what these populated formulas do. Then these net new formulas calculate how often did Clearbit have a value when Crunchbase didn't. So that happened 424 times. Then the ZoomInfo net new calculates how often ZoomInfo had a value and Clearbit didn't. And then the same for Crunchbase. How often did Crunchbase have a value for a certain field when either ZoomInfo or Clearbit didn't. So that's what these net new formulas do. That's what the populated formulas do. The winner formulas here just count how often each platform appears in the winner column. So here we can see that Crunchbase is the winner, is marked as the winner 441 times in this column, whereas ZoomInfo it's only 268. And then for disagreements, in the case that there was a disagreement in this column, how often was Clearbit marked as the winner? And we can see that happened 17 times. Or in the case that there was a disagreement in this column, how often was ZoomInfo marked as the winner? And that was 4 times. And then these formulas here calculate how often they overlapped. So in the case that it's just ZoomInfo and Clearbit, how many times did they both have a value for this field? So that happened 502 times. Or when there's 3 enrichment platforms, there's 3 different overlaps that need to be assessed. So Clearbit and ZoomInfo, but how many times did Clearbit and Crunchbase both have a value for the field? How many times did Crunchbase and ZoomInfo have a value for the field? Then how often did all 3 enrichment tools have a value for a field? So again, these are all summarized here, what each of the formulas represent. And now the interesting part of this comes to, sorry, I'm trying to move this window here, the top right corner, it's not moving. Now the fun part comes where we've got all the data for each of the 11 fields. For each of these 11 fields, we've got these 17 metrics calculated. So just to scroll across and show you that. So the next part is to pull all this information into a nice tabulated view so you can digest it more easily and extract some insights. Okay, zoomed out too much there. I know that's tiny, sorry. Zooming back in. Let's go 1, 2, 5. That's the zoom. I summarize all the insights I extract from this data here in this blog post, but I'll walk you through the actual data that helps me find some of these insights. So one of the things I noticed is that for the vast majority of the fields, Clearbit is always able to populate more records than ZoomInfo. So we can see it wins almost all of the time. And a good summary of that is actually the overall field. So if you want to look on a field by field basis, which enrichment platform is better, you can compare field by field this way. We can see Clearbit's better at populating the LinkedIn URL than ZoomInfo. But if you want to look overall to say which platform is the best at populating all of these fields on aggregate, we can see that ZoomInfo wins. So 31% of the time it has a value for the records versus 21% of the time ZoomInfo has a value for the records. And this is replicated in every region. It's a bit closer in the US. EMEA, it's further apart. Clearbit's much better. And then APAC, again, significant difference there. And then unknown, Clearbit wins as well. I won't focus on unknown too much because we don't know. A lot of these people are free males who weren't enriched, so the information isn't really valuable. Most valuable information is in these 4 sectors. The only exception to this rule is for the person phone field. We can see that consistently, no matter what geography, ZoomInfo is always able to populate more phone numbers than Clearbit. So it wins overall, it wins in the US, it wins in EMEA, and it wins heavily in APAC. And we can also see, again, the dominance of Clearbit when we look at the winner fields, like how often was Clearbit present in the winner column in the enrichment metrics sheet. And we can see that Clearbit dominates again, apart from phone number. And in the case where there were disagreements, we can also see that Clearbit wins the majority of the time. And this is replicated across all the different regions too. So what does that tell us and what does it help us infer? So the fact that Clearbit populates the most records will suggest that it could be the best enrichment tool if that's what you're looking for. However, if you're trying to supply your outbound sales team with phone numbers, then ZoomInfo might be a better choice because it has a lot more phone numbers than Clearbit does. So you might want to use ZoomInfo for your outbound sales team, but when you're building your lead scoring model, you might want to use Clearbit because Clearbit has the most enrichment data available for the most records. And we can also see that if you do have multiple enrichment platforms and you're wondering which one to use, these winner columns suggest that Clearbit should be the default value. You can have ZoomInfo as a backup, but then you can have Crunchbase as a third or as a second backup. Yeah, and the reason I say this is because whenever there's a disagreement, Clearbit wins all the time. So that indicates to me, since we got a human to manually review all these disagreements, and Clearbit came out as the winner every time, that tells me that Clearbit is the most accurate platform. So that's why I'd want to use it for a scoring model. And also we can see in the winner columns as well, it was present in the winner column more often than ZoomInfo and Crunchbase. So just the fact that it populates the most records and it seems to be the most accurate, I'd recommend using Clearbit to build your lead scoring model, and then ZoomInfo for phone numbers. If you do have multiple enrichment platforms, or you're wondering, is it worth bringing ZoomInfo on just to get all the better phone number information? One thing to consider is that if we look at the net new fields here, so ZoomInfo, let's look at, say, the US, for example. So in the US, ZoomInfo on average has 11% of the field values that Clearbit or Crunchbase didn't have. If we look at EMEA, we can see that ZoomInfo has 7%. It was able to populate 7% of the records where Clearbit or Crunchbase couldn't. And then the same for APAC. it was able to populate 7% of the records when Clearbit or Crunchbase couldn't. Yeah, that's correct. So that will help you know to say, okay, if we do bring ZoomInfo on, then we'll be able to get better phone number information, and it'll also allow us to enrich an extra 10% of our records in the US, EMEA, and APAC. Whereas contrasting this, if we look at the Crunchbase net new, we can see it adds very little information that Clearbit and ZoomInfo don't already have. So here it only adds 1% of extra population. If we look at here in the US, it only provides an extra 4% of information that Clearbit and ZoomInfo don't already have. And then in APAC, it's basically 0%. And even if we just look at the percentage populated, we can see that Crunchbase is only able to populate 19% of the records, 24%, and 18%. And when we compare like these figures to the population that Clearbit and ZoomInfo get, we're able to see that it's probably not worth bringing Crunchbase on if you already have Clearbit and ZoomInfo, or if you have even just one of these tools, it probably still isn't worth the money to bring Crunchbase on. And this could be because of the way Crunchbase is set up. It specifically focuses on startup companies, and you only get that firmographic information. So because it's startups and only firmographic information, that could be why it performs so poorly here. But based on this analysis, it doesn't look like it's worth adding Crunchbase to your tech stack. So I know I was talking for a long time there and stumbling and stuttering my way through, but again, it's all summarized here, the insights I take, and then as a very clean summary, you can say down below that Clearbit is the best enrichment tool when it comes to populating the most records and being the most accurate at populating these records. Therefore, that's why you might want to use it to build your demographic and firmographic scoring model. And if you're wondering which fields to expose to sales, do you expose the Clearbit field or the ZoomInfo field or the Crunchbase field? You should expose the Clearbit field because it seems to be the most accurate. And ZoomInfo is the best enrichment tool for getting phone numbers. And if you already have something like Clearbit and you're thinking of bringing ZoomInfo on, it could enrich an extra 10% of your records. So that's why if you want to equip your outbound sales team with phone numbers, then ZoomInfo is the best enrichment tool. And then finally, Crunchbase adds very little information that Clearbit and ZoomInfo do not already have. So it's probably not worth bringing into your tech stack. So what can you do to improve this analysis and run it with your own data? You can follow the exact same steps I did, but you can go one step further and do this little bit of extra cleanup that I mentioned. So you can clean up the job title and company name fields. So I give two examples up the top here. Like you can clean up the job title fields to remove all characters that are not white space characters like hyphens, commas, and you can be consistent with your use of and, or you can just remove it as well. So either use ampersand all the time, or either use and all the time, or just remove this character completely. And then here we can see a good example of that. So either be consistent and use and all the time so that these two values will match, or use ampersand all the time so these two values will match. And you can also think about removing the from these fields, so then the formula will no longer mark them as disagree, and there will be a lot less manual review to conduct. So just to show you what I mean by that, if we scroll across, let's say company name, yeah. So here the formula says it's disagree, but clearly these are the exact same values. And thankfully the intern was able to manually review these two and see that they're the same. So they put in the value of Clearbit and ZoomInfo as the winner. However, to save manual work, if you do this cleanup, then this formula will automatically choose this value and reduce the amount of work the intern has to do. So that's one cleanup that can be done. And then the other I mentioned is normalizing and mapping all these different industry values between the three platforms. And then once you do that, develop a formula create an agree formula here that says, do the industries returned by these three platforms agree, or like which is the winner, and use the same sort of logic that I've done here. Use the same sort of logic that I've done here to choose whether it's Clearbit and ZoomInfo are the winner, whether it's Crunchbase who's the winner, whether it's a tie, whether it's a disagreement, etc. You can build this exact same logic once you've normalized and mapped the industries from the three enrichment tools. And then the final step is you've done this cleanup of industry, you've done the cleanup of company name and job title. What that will do is it will significantly reduce the number of disagreements in this sheet. So then when there are disagreements remaining, then you can get an intern to manually review them. And then that won't take as long because you've done all this cleanup. And once the intern has manually reviewed all the disagreements in the sheet, that will mean that the numbers in this sheet are much more accurate. And therefore you can make much more sound decisions knowing that this data is more accurate. So that's what I list as some final steps here. Take this, clone this Google Sheet, make it your own. You can use the exact same formulas I've had in here, but then put your own data into it, do the cleanup I recommend, get an intern to maybe manually review some of the disagreements, and then you'll end up with a lot of accurate numbers in here for your own data to make the best decisions for your company. So I hope that all makes sense. I know I've been speaking for about 40 minutes now, and sometimes I muddled my words, so I might not have got the point across. So if you do have any questions, feel free to comment on this video or to comment in the blog post or just reach out to me. I've got a form here. If you want to ask any questions to me directly, you fill out the form, that'll come straight to me. So please get in touch if you're any way confused. Thank you.